So this is an informal panel discussion, so led predominantly by all of you. And this is about mentorship, being a mentee, being a mentor. And I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves because part of this is learning people's stories and narratives. And I just want to hear a little bit about all of your stories and narratives. So we'll start over here.
Hi, I'm Wendy Coates, and I am at Harbor UCLA, and I'm on the SAEM Board of Directors. And you want to know my story?
Just really like 90 seconds.
90 seconds. Okay, so my elevator pitch. Ooh. Okay, so my elevator pitch is that, you know, I came from Pennsylvania, and I got this idea that I wanted to come to Southern California and applied to all the academic places in Southern California. And one of the query letters that I sent out was to Bob here, and he says, well, yeah, sure, we'll interview you. And I'm like, what, really? Okay, so I came out sort of thinking, well, wow, this is really cool. I can go to Harbor UCLA. It'll be a great 5-year stint. I'm sure I'll learn a lot. I'll get my foundation in, you know, in being a faculty member and doing cool stuff in emergency medicine with all these really important, famous people. And so that was in 1992, and then I'll just pass it on to you. If you are oriented to time, you know that this is 2019. So.
Hi, I'm Bob Hockberger. I'm a chair emeritus of emergency medicine and professor emeritus of emergency medicine at Harbor UCLA, not UCLA, Harbor, the county hospital affiliated with UCLA. 90 seconds. I grew up the oldest of 6 boys in a large Midwestern Catholic family. I spent a lot of my youth babysitting, and I think a lot of my life duplicating that situation. When I was a resident, I enjoyed teaching how to start a central line more than starting a central line, teaching someone how to talk a patient out of leaving against medical advice as opposed to doing it myself. I think that's why I gravitated to being a residency director at Harbor and then later a department chair, which is really only being a residency director at a slightly higher level. I've been involved in a number of national organizations, again, because it's just fun for me. I like group activities, and you look like a good group.
Yeah, Bob's a groupie. What can I say? I'm Bill Barsen from the University of Michigan. 90 seconds, okay. So I started off as a resident at University of Cincinnati when it was still a 2-year residency, which gives you an idea of how old I am, and Bob and I are about the same age. And I was a faculty member there until 1992. I was doing research in TPA and stroke. Went to the University of Michigan in 1992 to start emergency medicine residency and ultimately a department of emergency medicine, and was chair there until about 6 years ago. Now most of my focus is running the, I ran the NET network, Neurologic Emergency Treatment Trials Network, and the SIREN network is what I'm running right now. So most of my time is tied up with research, but over the years, all of us, I know, have mentored many, many people over time.
All right. So, questions? Yeah, if you can.
Go ahead, go for it.
Should we reintroduce ourselves?
We know you.
Yeah, okay. So it provides this not fully thought out question. I guess to summarize it, like, how do you deal with baby switch dynamics? And so without, to say it a little less provocatively,
So I think we can answer that question. They did ask us to start out by each of us spending 10 minutes talking about our experiences with mentoring and being a mentor. And I think that may help address it, but in the end we can talk about it's a good intro question. Come back and address specific questions that people have.
It's up to you. They've been hearing a whole bunch of speakers all morning, so I'm hoping for some of the panel to be a little more interactive. And I feel like if we take another 30 minutes, but up to you. I don't want to, if you prepared something.
Okay,
Your
then.
answer might come out in answering.
Right. No, that's okay. I guess we probably all have different answers to this, or similar answers, I bet. A mentor-mentee relationship is that. It's a relationship. And like all relationships, there's a point at which you decide this relationship's not going where you need it to go. You need to dissolve that relationship. I wouldn't worry about burning bridges. You need to pick a mentor who's got some expertise and experience in an area where you have interest, and then you don't ask someone to be your mentor. You ask them to help you on a project you think they would be a good support structure for a person, or you ask to help them. And then you do your best, right? Because the whole idea is this is a first date. This is a first project where you're trying to figure out, does this person's personality and work style fit with mine? And if you do well and that person does a good job, you move on to another and another. And those series of projects is a mentor-mentee relationship that's developed over time. So if you decide after a first date that this is just not going to move on to a significant relationship, or after the second that you're being taken for a ride or abused by the other person in this potential relationship, then you need to be very politic and explain that here are what your needs are, and you think, it's not you, it's me. I need something different than what I'm getting in this relationship, and it's time to move on.
Yeah, so what you're describing is very, very common. And so you shouldn't feel bad like, oh my God, I failed in an area, or they failed me, and then that's something really weird. It's not really weird. So, typically when, I was department chair and I'd hire faculty and I'd line them up with mentors to begin with, and sometimes they worked and sometimes they didn't, but you would expect that sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it's not, right? Because sometimes the incentives don't align, and I agree with Bob. You go find somebody else, and you don't necessarily say, you've not been a good mentor, I'm leaving you, but you just don't meet with them as much, and you go find somebody else who you meet with more, and eventually that sort of goes away. But that's not an uncommon relationship and not an uncommon thing to happen.
Another thing I wanted to bring up is just to kind of have everybody on the same page. Advisors are people who know stuff that you need to know. And so it's kind of like you go to an advisor to say, hey, what courses do I need to take to graduate? And that person provides you the information. A mentor should be someone who is a person who actually selflessly cares about your career development. And it really takes them quite a lot of time to do their job properly. And you guys, when you're picking a mentor, you should find somebody, number one, that you're not competing with. Because, then you set up this dynamic where if, are you going to be the first author, or are they going to be the first author? So you want to have someone who's kind of been there, done that, and that they get their kicks kind of from seeing you grow and develop and watching you succeed. And if any of you are parents in the room, or have parents, you know that parents go to soccer games. Most parents hate soccer games, but they go because they are really interested in developing their kids' interest and supporting them, and they kind of revel in their successes. So you want to make sure that your mentor is there because of you and trying to help you move forward. And then sponsorship is kind of, I don't know, I think it's kind of a new catchy term, but it's really what a mentor has always been, that you find someone who's going out and looking for things for you to do. And I guess as a mentor, I've always tried to be that person, and now it just has another label. And then a slick way out of it is to realize that you're not, it's not like the, whatever it is, the one gene, one enzyme theory. You don't have to have one mentor. So, Bob was one of my primary mentors as a faculty member, but he was like the absolute worst person to go to if I had a question about how to be a mom in academic emergency medicine. Now, if I went to him and said, hey, how should I be a mom in academic emergency medicine? He would have said, well, duh, why don't you go find someone who is a mom in academic emergency medicine who is, that you want to emulate. You look at them and they're there where you want to be and find out how they got there. Well, that doesn't mean that I can't have that mentorship relationship with him. It just means that I need to find a new one for another area, and that goes for, gender and life situation. You want to find somebody maybe different for research, and all of these people, you can build your team. Long answer.
Another question? Well, come on, you must have some.
So, you said, a mentor should be someone who's invested selflessly in your growth. And also mentioned that it takes a lot of time. So, essentially, how much should you be bugging your mentor? Great question. Did everyone hear the question? So, how much should you be bugging your mentor, essentially? Yeah. With the nuances of here's an abstract I submitted, to every aspect of that, to overlook my presentation and slides, make people can you practice a presentation, to what level should you rely on these skills?
So a couple things. I think there's different kinds of, there's different terms. Mentors sort of taken on a term like supposed to mean one thing. And it really, like Wendy said, covers a scope of things. There's sponsorship as part of this, coaching is part of this, mentorship is part of this. And so sometimes it's selfless, sometimes especially the coaching aspect and the sponsor aspect, and it's just like, I'm going to help you, I expect nothing from you but to see you grow and get better. But sometimes it's different too. So I've got one faculty member right now that I'm working with at Michigan who had an interest in CNS biomarkers, and we've got a big NIH-funded study on traumatic brain injury, and I was overworked, and I told him, I said, hey, here, I really need help, and I need you to pick up some of this work for me. In return, you will end up being one of the PIs in this study, which is a good thing for his career. It's also a good thing for me because I got somebody who's doing a lot of the heavy lifting for me, but he's getting something out of it. And so I think it just depends on the relationship and how you're working together. I think if this mentor is somebody who's you're working in the same area, it's more of a research mentor. Asking them to look at your abstracts and your presentations and stuff is very appropriate. Some people just may say, I just don't have the time, but it's just something you got to work out. I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer. But I think now if it's somebody who's more of a sponsor, it may be an imposition on their time to say, gosh, I want you to look at my 50 PowerPoints to make sure they're all okay, right? So it depends.
Yes, in preparation for this, I've read a fair number of articles on mentorship, including one that talked about the classic terrible mentees. And there were two. One was the vampire, and one was the lone wolf, or the lone what? The lone wolf. Right. So, and they're at two ends of the spectrum. At one end is the vampire, who will suck the lifeblood out of their mentee with their phone calls and texts and emails and requests for meetings, and it's just too much. At the other end, and I've had more experience at the other end, with people who are very bright, very independent, very accomplished, and they accept a task, and then you never hear from them. Either because they're overconfident and don't know what they don't know, because they don't want to show what they don't know, and the only way you find out is when they make a mistake or they deliver something that's not what you'd hoped it would be. And for me, the way as a mentor to deal with it is to establish some expectations up front, based on who they are, their level of experience, the complexity of the problem, discuss the problem, and then send them out. And I would meet with them weekly or monthly or quarterly, depending upon the level and the complexity, with deliverables at each end to make sure that I could teach them what they didn't know, or at least give them my perspective, so I wasn't surprised at 6 or 12 months when this just wasn't what I had hoped it would be and knew it could be. So I think it's just, again, it's a work style, lifestyle. If you had come to me and I simply didn't have time, I know some other faculty member who would have time to go over your lecture with you because that's where their area of expertise was. And so I think it's, you simply just need to work it out. But it's good to be aware of the fact that there is this spectrum and you have to kind of hit the sweet spot with your mentor.
Another thing related to what you said is that if you're asking a mentor to be looking over your slides or to review your abstract, well, did you do this completely 100% on your own, the abstract, and put together the slides, or were you part of a greater study group that had a senior researcher, for example? Because that person then would be the mentor, like your research mentor. And, you know, while we would like to all sit here on the stage and like have halos over our heads as like these selfless people who are just, you know, here for you only, like you guys as mentees really do a lot for us as well, because we get to learn new things, we get to get rejuvenated by your enthusiasm about things that have long ago not been interesting for us, but seeing them through your eyes makes us all excited about that again. We can do some research projects or some, you know, whatever it is that you do, quality improvement, that we may not have time to do on our own, like Bill was saying. And so you guys give us a lot in return. So just kind of keep that in mind, that it's always a two-way street, any relationship. And, you know, other than an infant, really there has to be a give and take. And so you're like your vampire person. Really, you have to find something that you can get from them. And as I get older, I find that one of the greatest things I can get from people of the younger generations is technological savvy. Because they're like, oh, you know, did you know that we could do this on Slack? I'm like, no, I didn't. What's Slack? And so then I learn a lot about those things, and I think it kind of keeps you young as a mentor, because then you get to learn a whole bunch of new stuff that you can you know, that you can mentor me while I'm mentoring you. So I think a give and take is always a good type of relationship. How about any other questions? Somebody else have a question?
I just sort of had a question about, I was sitting here thinking, like, I wish there was an app, like a dating app for mentors, where I could be like, hey, sweet, this guy does ECMO, let me see if he wants to meet me. Because the problem I have is I'm like the only person in my institution who does what I do. So finding mentorship within my institution is challenging. And I have a mentor from a private institution, but sometimes it's just hard to keep that going from so far apart. So, like, suggestions on finding mentors outside of your institution, and like how to, like, how do you make somebody who's never met you want to be involved and somewhat selfless in helping you grow outside of their own program if you can't offer them, like, hey, authorship on my paper or participation in this?
Distance mentorship is tough. Especially in scientific aspects, it's a little bit easier when it's career coaching and things like that, and what should I do? You can do that over the phone. It's not really very difficult to do. The scientific mentoring, I think, is much tougher. And so you need some kind of an entree. You need somebody who's going to speak up for you and connect you with those people. It's going to be substandard. It's not going to be as good as having somebody on site. Sometimes, though, I mean, depending on, I don't know what institution you're in, some institutions are so huge, I know ours is, sometimes I don't even know half the people there, and sometimes I'll talk to somebody outside and they'll say, oh, there's this guy there in Michigan who does this. I didn't know that. And then I'd you know, fix somebody up with that person to help them out. So I think depending on whoever your other mentor was, to say, hey, you know, is there anybody here, other people I should talk to, you know, whatever, and try to build a network. But it's difficult. It's difficult to build it at a distance, especially if you're doing scientific work.
One other thing related to that is that you may be hoping to find an emergency medicine researcher who studies ECMO. But if you think back, yeah, okay. So if you think back to the early days of emergency medicine research, there just weren't researchers at all, okay, in emergency medicine. And so the earliest researchers had to look outside of our specialty, and they had to find people who were, you know, like in the Department of Neurosurgery, or who were, you know, doing completely different basic science research, and they just kind of put themselves in the place to, it's like, hey, you know, I just want to learn from you, and I want to see if we can collaborate. And again, sometimes those turned into really good partnerships, because maybe these people had great basic lab theories, and they were working on animal models, and now suddenly they have a clinical researcher that they can pair with. And so you just have to be kind of a little bit more creative about where you look, and also going to meetings and meeting people and reading papers. I mean, I think most people who are in a position of expertise would be happy with at least an introductory email asking, you know, a very discreet thing, not like, hey, hi, yeah, it's me. But like if you say, here are my credentials, and you know, I've seen your work of XYZ, and I'd like to see if I could talk to you about this, you know, one point. And then you make that kind of an introduction or something.
Harbor UCLA is one of 5 hospitals in the UCLA system. And so when my faculty would come to me, the first question is there something in our department, someone, or one of the other emergency departments, or in your case, critical care, someone in critical care at Harbor or at one of the other institutions? If not, then you kind of have to go broader. I think SAEM historically was an amazing way to find colleagues. Before we had all of these research centers, what people had were interest groups and committees, and people that got together spontaneously at meetings like this to talk about commonality of research interests, and that's really the nidus from which most of these research groups developed. You may need to develop your own research group. I mean, there is one for critical care. Maybe starting here with that is a way to begin. Another question? I'll tell you, what time do we go till? I'll tell you about my first experience. I trained at the University of Chicago in the mid-'70s when Peter Rosen was both the department chair and the residency director. And one evening after we worked a 4 to 12 shift together, he asked me if I wanted to go to Chinatown with him. So we went to Chinatown and spent most of the evening just talking. And he told me about the challenges he had growing up, why he went into medicine and initially into surgery, why he switched to emergency medicine, his vision for emergency medicine, what he wanted to accomplish with this career, and the potential that he thought I had and thought I ought to consider an academic career. I remember he drove me back to the hospital, and as I drove home to go to bed, the sun was rising, and I thought I knew that I wanted an academic career. I wanted to please Peter. I wanted to be one of Peter's boys. So I thought about it, and so I decided, I read a whole lot more. I tried to teach more on my shifts. I put a few lectures together, and a month later I went to see him, and because one of our faculty were leaving, and I applied for a faculty position, and I got it. It wasn't until several years later that I heard that every one of the senior residents got taken to Chinatown for an overnight dinner and meeting with Peter because he thought everyone had potential, but that he chose me. A number of people applied because I seemed to want it. I seemed to be hungry for it. He could see the change in me. And so I think, as I talked before, the relationships, you start off, this is what I think I want to do. You find someone to help you, and you just do your best. And sometimes it works out, and sometimes it doesn't. We went from being mentor-mentee to friends over the years. He gave me advice when I became a department chair. I wrote chapters for his textbook and later became an editor for his textbook. I got to sit on the editorial board for his journal. He really was immensely helpful to me, and in the ideal world, that's what happens. You become a mentee to a colleague to a friend, and I think we all probably have stories like that. These are happy ending stories, right? Because I'm up here and I'm telling you about the happy ending stories. They're not so happy ending stories. It's a trial and effort. More questions?
Thanks for sharing this. I mean, it's really helpful. I finished a residency this past year, and I took up an academic job at
Depends on whether or not you know what you want to do, right? So I think becoming, my own opinion, becoming director of research when you're 1 year out of residency at a place is the best way to extinguish your career as a researcher. And it's been done over and over and over again, because people get bumped up to that position because they've done some stuff and they show promise. But once you get in a position like that where you're helping everybody else do their research and you're not established on your own, you're not gonna go any further. I think it's okay to do a lot of potpourri stuff in academics. Just depends on what you want to do. But if you really want to, if you're like folks that say, I want to be an NIH-funded researcher, I want to be a residency program director, I want to be whatever it is that you want to be, then I think you have to keep your focus on that and set your career up in ways that you'll be successful doing that. And I would say, if your main goal is to be a researcher, be a researcher. Don't try to take an administrative position doing that. But I mean, that's a discussion that you need to have, but it's tough because a lot of times it looks like, oh, well, that's leading me the way I want to go. But a lot of times it's not. And I had a mentor, my old boss, when I was at Cincinnati, and I wanted to develop as a researcher, and they were asking me to be an assistant dean in the College of Medicine there to do some stuff, and I thought, wow, that sounds really cool, because I'm only like 7 years out of my residency or something. I thought, well, that can't be, that's got to be something that's really good. And my chair said, you want to be a researcher? Be a researcher. Don't be an assistant dean. That's not the way to get to where you want to go. And it was great advice.
I would say the two most important answers that you should exercise on a regular basis are yes and no. The yes is pretty easy because everything sounds really cool and really exciting. And so people are all excited about what they do, and hopefully because they're so excited about it, they can offer you a role in whatever they're excited about and make it sound really sexy. And so then you say, oh, yes. But what you have to analyze for yourself is, does this meet my goals? Like, I'm mapping out a progression. It's like if you're going on a trip. Let's say you're driving across the country and you want to make decisions. Should I go the northern route or the southern route? Well, it's the middle of winter, so I think I'll go the southern route. And here are the key cities I want to stop in along the way. Well, then, suddenly you get to one of the cities and you find, oh, wow, I totally love this. And maybe now you change your mind and now you've found your thing. The only way that you can find your thing is if you've had a chance to say yes to certain propositions in the past. But if you say yes to everything, then now what you are is you're just a vehicle for all of the other people who are achieving their dreams. And so you need to kind of wait and find what excites you. And if saying yes to several things gets you to that point, then when you get there, you need to learn how to say no in a gracious way so that maybe people will keep asking you different things. And then truly evaluate every opportunity that you have and give it some sort of a test. Will this help my career? And maybe it'll help your science, maybe it'll help your relationships, maybe there's a soft skill that you can gain from, participating in whatever it is. Maybe there's a networking benefit that you can get. And so you have to find out what box does this opportunity check. And if you can't identify a box, then you have to say no. So those are, I don't know, now I'm rambling.
That's the trouble when you get old people up on a stage. There's a classic exercise that people recommend if you're trying to figure out what to do with your life, and that is to describe what you want to do with your life in 7 words or less. So you start off by writing a paragraph about what you like doing, don't like doing, are good at, not good at, want to accomplish with your life, and then you pare it down till you get to 7 words. For me, at the end of my first year on the faculty in Chicago, it was serve the poor through medical education activities. That's really what I thought I wanted to do, and then offered the residency director spot at a public hospital in California where I could run on the beach at sunrise instead of in slush and rush hour traffic in Chicago. It was like perfect. 8 years later, when our chair left and they offered me the position, I went through that exercise again, and it was to provide leadership to highly committed professional colleagues. And going back to that helps you make decisions about what it is you want to do with your life when you have all these opportunities. I hesitate to say this because you're all probably brand new faculty or new. If you're at the right institution with the right leadership, then get yourself busy doing the stuff that you want to do. I had a lot of great faculty. Wendy was the best at managing me up. Wendy was our director of medical student education. She thought at the time that she wanted to be a dean. We're an affiliate, we're not UCLA, so she volunteered on her own time to sit on committees at UCLA. If I met with her and I wanted things done, she showed me what she was doing and asked me if there's something I wanted her to drop in order to do something else, because we knew what she wanted to do. Later, when she became offered the chance to be a chair of a major committee at UCLA, there was money associated with that, and so she asked for my help in figuring out how to have the county and the UCLA work together so that money that would pay her would really pay for shifts at Harbor to free her up to go to UCLA. She would come to me for advice periodically. She would, whenever there was an award out there for education and she thought she was a good candidate, she'd come and ask to meet with me and explain, here's an award, I think this is what it might do to help me with my career. If you think that I'd be good for it, might you nominate me for it? She was very good at using me to help her realize her vision. And at the same time, she made me realize that not all my faculty were that good, and in some instances I was going to have to reach out and be more aggressive myself to figure out how to get these people some help to reach their goals.
I have a little follow-up on this. So then, like if you have someone like Bob as one of your mentors and is willing to, you know, go out on a limb and like recommend you or endorse you or whatever it is or give you an opportunity, well, like then you need to step up your game and actually deliver. So, you know, he offered me, he was an editor for the Rosen textbook in emergency medicine, and I think I was on my first year of the faculty, and he goes, so do you want to write a chapter? And, you know, that was a pretty big deal. He goes, you know, I have schizophrenia and anorectal disorders. I'm like, oh great, like odds and ends, heads or tails, you know, like lots of things like that, neither of which were areas of interest. And I'm like, dude, don't you have anything that, like, I mean, I didn't really say it exactly like this, or maybe I did. He goes, well, you know, in either of these areas, there's really nobody who's known as the specialist in this area. And if you do a good job with this, then you can go out and you can be known for this. And I'll never forget walking into my first time giving this major lecture on anorectal disorders at ASEP, okay? And I'm like, the butt queen has arrived. And like, there's no way to make like 500 people in a room less comfortable than to just own it. But I think I did a good job on the chapter, and you know, so that I think like I would have just died if I had done a horrible job, and then I would have known that he never would have offered me any opportunities ever again. So if a mentor really does something for you at any point, make sure that you give back and don't make them look stupid for thinking of you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Mark Probst from Mount Sinai, New York. I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about how to make the mentee-mentor relationship beneficial for the mentor. You touched on this a little bit earlier, but I was wondering if you guys could fill out that answer. Because there are obviously certain ways, but they're not always obvious.
I've got the microphone, so I'll get the first go. I think one of them is like the example I gave with a person helping out with the research project, and you know, I think particularly in the research area that can be very helpful, or in any other area. So you know, if you're working in the ultrasound area, for example, and you know your mentor might be the division chief or something, seeing if there's things that you can pick up. And I think one of the other, can't remember if it was Dave Brown or Mike Donnino mentioned, you know, showing up. Right? And so that can be a huge help. So when somebody in a position, and Bob knows this and Wendy knows this, when you know you've got an area and you've got to delegate stuff, you need to have people to delegate to. You want to know it's people who are interested and who will do the work. And so, but it's a way to give you more experience and get more exposure as well. So I think those are opportunities, you know, in a research or a non-research area. Same in education, you know. Showing up for the resident education things, and you know those things get noticed after a while, and you know you can move up that way.
If I think about the best mentees, the best faculty I've had, other than managing up. They worked really hard, and they asked for my help when they ran into problems. Whenever I met with them, they were always up. They were always glasses half full kind of person, had me a lot of energy, which made me feel good. And they took whatever constructive criticism I offered to heart. Rather than feeling bad, they actually would thank me for it. I remember the first time when I went to Harbor in 1980, I went out with my best friend, who was the department chair. I was the residency director. And at the end of the year, he calls me up and says, I need to meet with you because I need to do your annual evaluation. I think it's my best friend. So we meet, and he starts off by saying, you know, this is awkward because we're best friends. But no one gets better without some critical feedback, and who better to give it to you than your best friend? An opportunity to get better. And I think looking at your mentor as your best friend and an opportunity to actually get critical feedback and thank them for it rather than kind of sullenly walk away. So work hard, have a positive attitude, and appreciate whatever critical feedback they give you. I think that makes it better for your mentor.
Another way to look at this is, as the mentor, you also have limited time. And so you don't want to waste your time on somebody who doesn't really appreciate what you're doing. And so just as one example, let's say that, so I began a medical education scholarship fellowship many, many years ago, and I've had, you know, really, really good people and some less good people, and mostly it was the ones who were self-motivated that went on to have the greatest success. And you know, interestingly, it takes a lot of time to help develop a career, okay? And so a lot of dedicated effort. So you want to make sure that you're investing in a person who's going to pull their half of the weight. And you don't want to be the one doing all the work for somebody else's advancement. And if you see that that's happening, then, you know, you meet with them, you identify the problem, you give them a chance to solve it, and if it doesn't, then cut them loose. But, you know, one of the things that I used to do, if somebody wanted to do a research project, most of my research is related to medical education scholarship. So somebody would come in and say, hey, I want to do this study, and we would talk about it for a little while. And my first thing was, great. What I want to do is set up another appointment with you in 2 weeks, and at that time I would like you to have the introduction of the resulting paper completed. Okay, so for every about 5 or 10 people who would come to me with a proposition to do a project, maybe 2 of them would actually do that. And not to say that was the final draft, but I knew that that would get them to go do the literature review and put together a cogent argument about what they were going to do. Then we would talk about the methods. And I'd say, okay, well, you know, in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever the next meeting was, I need you to come back to me with your methods section written, which is really the recipe for, like, what are we going to do now? And if they did it, then that was great. And I knew that my time was going to be well spent mentoring them. And, you know, the ones that just don't bother coming back, or they come back in 6 months, oh, remember that study we talked about? I'm like, yeah, well, where are you on that? Well, you know, I was going to do a lit review. I'm like, bye, have fun. So you want to make sure you're choosing a good investment portfolio as you're choosing your mentees as well. Are you asking for the mentor? How the mentor does this?
Yeah, my mentor is kind of listening to it right now.
I think I know what so you're asking if somebody comes up to you with an opportunity and say, hey, I would like you to write this chapter on abdominal emergencies, and you're not interested in abdominal emergencies. Correct. I think the easiest thing, I think it's nice to be, you know, very polite, very thankful and whatever, and I really appreciate this opportunity, et cetera, but my thing would be, what you'll want to do, it's sort of like breaking off a bad relationship, right? You don't want to drag it on. You don't want to go, well, let me think about that, and yeah, I might want to do that, because they might be thinking, you know, you're first on my list, but if you don't do it, I'm going to go to number 2 or number 3. So I think the sooner you can just cut it, the best, in a very polite and you know, thankful way. Yeah, and that can be awkward, and hopefully the individual's not going to be somebody who's going to be like, be all snarky with you, but they shouldn't be. And it's not on you if they are, as in my opinion. It's on them, because, you know, if that's not something you're seeing as something that's going to advance your career, then you really shouldn't do it.
The yes, no, yes kind of thing, I have a variation on that, and I learned this from an ASAP president. The philosophy of yes, that when anyone asks something from you, they're afraid you're going to say no. If you say no, your face scrunches up, your voice comes down, and the wall comes up, and there's no negotiating. So the first ought to be positive, and the nurses are the best at this. And so it's, you know, your patient asks for 10 milligrams of morphine IV, and you go, you know, I know why you'd want that, but I think I've got a better drug. Yes, I'm going to do that, but first. Absolutely, right after. And so I think if someone came to me and asked me to write a textbook chapter, I'd say, you know, that is so great that you thought that of me for this. However, my interest is really in this area, and if you've got any chapters in this area, I would love to author or co-author those. I had this conversation. I joined the Rotary when I semi-retired a few years ago, and I hike on Saturday mornings with several Rotary friends, and we were talking about this issue, and each one of us gave our perspective on how you turn something down. And one of them was our current president, who's done a great job, and was asked, because this is going to be pretty time-consuming, asked by the district governor if he would serve as the assistant district governor next year, which means he'd be in line to be governor. And his answer when he asked was, God, no. Which pretty much closed it off. So I think if there is an opportunity to which you absolutely want to close it off, the God, no is effective.
I might mention, though, be careful, because sometimes, and I'm not saying, I don't know the circumstance, but sometimes some of those things are, there are opportunities in disguise. You know, like I had one young faculty member who was a Robert Wood Johnson scholar, and he was very interested in sports injuries. That's what he wanted to do, sports injuries and whatever. And so we got him interested in doing some stuff in stroke, which is what I was working with. And he had a specific area that he was focused on, which was communications and stuff, which was great. And so we worked on a project together, put it together. He had a platform presentation at the International Stroke Conference, which is like a 5,000 attendee thing. I mean, this is really a big deal. And said, gosh, there's more stuff we could do. I said, nope, sports injuries. I'm doing sports injuries. In retrospect, that's fine, and he stayed in that. But sometimes there's opportunities that might arise. And from my own career, I was a laboratory researcher doing stuff in resuscitation science. And at the time, this was way back in the 80s, there was interest in high-dose naloxone for shock states. And so I was working in the lab doing this thing with high-dose naloxone in shock states. And at the same time, the NIH came out with a RFA for a study looking at high-dose naloxone in stroke. I had like zero interest in stroke, none. But the guy there in neurology who was doing it said, was asking around, said, is there anybody in this institution that knows about naloxone? And I said, well, this guy in emergency medicine does. Maybe you should talk to him. And so he talked to me, and my initial response was to say, no, I don't do stroke. And then I started thinking, wait a minute, this is a chance for an NIH grant, da-da-da-da-da, and whatever. And it was one of the best decisions I ever made. So, yeah, make sure you don't stare the gift horse in the mouth, but I think Bob's advice about politely turning something down is exactly right.
I remember I went to my first ABEM board meeting, and there were discussions, and they needed someone to lead the effort to revamp or relook at the core content. You now know it as the EM model. And no one volunteered because the job was to work with SAEM and CORD and ASAP and EMRA to try to get things done. And everyone knew it was going to be a huge time suck and a political challenge. I said no. Yeah, he said no. He'd been on a couple of years and knew. But no one volunteered, so I volunteered. It was a 2-year project, $250,000. But what I learned about the different organizations and the friendships I made with people who were in leadership positions in the other organizations, immensely helpful to me in my career. And I am sure part of the reason that I was elected president eventually. I stepped forward and did something no one else wanted to do, worked hard and did it reasonably well, and showed myself to be a team player. As in the last lecture it said, you need to be seen as a team player, as caring about the team, and if so, people on the team will care about you.
Okay, yeah, one more question.
Well, you know, all of you guys touched on the basis, like a mentee needs to be hardworking, good attitude, self-driven and all of those things. But does that really compensate for competence? Or is that something that, I mean, as early faculty, you don't necessarily have the competence and those skills, you will eventually get there?
Well, you guys are, if you think about who gets into medical school, like you guys were probably all at the top of your high school class and at the top of your college class and at the top of your medical school class, and eventually you have such a narrow band of people that you're dealing with that when you say, oh my gosh, this is the worst emergency medicine resident I've ever worked with, you're talking about somebody who's still like in the top 1% of the population, okay? So the people that you're dealing with are really very talented anyway. And I think that one of the challenges that I've had as a mentor is to find out kind of what floats their boat. And, people all really do have a lot of potential. And as a mentor, it's really not my job to make them what I want them to be. It's to help them discover who they want to be and to help them realize that. So like in one of my leadership roles in the medical school, I had the opportunity to appoint directors of various things. So I had my fellows, and when we discussed, well, what do you want to be known for someday in emergency medicine? And the one person who said, well, I'd really like to be known for assessment. Well, then I created within my my realm there a director of assessment position. Okay, so if you find out what they want to do and help them become themselves, then you'll have a lot more buy-in from your mentees than if you say you must fit into my rigid model. And if you just can't work together, then it's not a failure of either individual, it's just a failure of that pairing. And the best thing that you might be able to do is refer them on to someone else. It's kind of like mom and dad. It's like, go ask your father, go ask your mother. Whenever you've just run out of your ability, you have another, a backup like that. So I hope that answers.
Yeah, I want to address one other thing because I'm not sure if this is what you're getting at. I think one of the things that's very important is sometimes feeling like you need to know everything, right, in order to do the kind of job somebody wants you to do. And, well, I don't have an experience in that. I'm not really great at biostatistics and whatever. And this is something that's very interesting, and it gets into, I'm going to jump into this a little bit, and that is inclusive mentoring, which I think is really important, and I've become very involved in that at the University of Michigan Medical School. And, one of the things that we find, and none of the women here will find this surprising, is that there might be you and maybe the guy who's sitting next to you and you both know about the same thing. Somebody will offer you something, you'll go, oh my God, I don't know if I know enough to do that or whatever. And he's going to say, oh yeah, I can do it, right? And I think it's one of those things that you have to recognize. Usually your mentor is not going to expect that you know everything. They're not going to expect that you're going to be an expert. And it's something that you should talk about. And it's a good discussion to have. Well, I don't feel like I know this stuff. Is that okay? Is that something I'm going to learn along the way? And I think a lot of times, especially when you're talking about mentoring across gender, I think for me that's something I always have to keep in mind is a lot of women will sell themselves short. And they'll say, oh, I don't really know if I know all the stuff I need to do. But they do. They know just as much most of the time as any of the guys. Just the guys already think they know it, and you don't, right? And so I think that's really important. I think the other thing, and this goes into, inclusive mentoring with underrepresented minorities as well, because a lot of times there's that same construct that goes on with underrepresented minorities, and is that it's an imposter syndrome. I really people think I can do this. I don't really know if I can do this, And it's something that is worthwhile, it's something you should bring up. If the mentor doesn't bring it up, you should bring it up and talk about that. Because I think it's really good to get those things across. The mentor needs to know where you're coming from and what you're bringing into this and sort of what your background is and you know, your confidence level and those kind of things. And I think that's all fair game and good to talk about.
Since I'm the oldest person in the room, I'll make the last comment. When I put my little talk together, I ran across a few things I wanted to share with you. Frank Shamrock was the only mixed martial arts champion to hold championship belts in every sports group that he was in, and to retire undefeated. And he once said, to be great at anything, everyone, you need a plus, a minus, and an equal. Someone who knows more than you to teach you, someone who knows less than you that you can teach, and an equal, someone at your level that you can measure yourself against. I think it's a good metaphor for academic careers and for mentorship. The other is John Maxwell, famous writer and speaker on topic of leadership. And he once said, we are each of us the average of the 5 people we spend our most time with. And so that resonates with me, and think about it. When you think about it, each stage of your career, including right now, who's the plus, who's the minus, and who's the equal? And are those people who will, in education or research or management and leadership, who are the people that will help you raise the level of your game? Think about it.